Hello, everyone, and welcome to Decoding Westworld, an unofficial podcast about the HBO original series Westworld. I'm David Chen.
I'm Joanna Robinson.
And welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in for the first time, what we do here on this podcast is we recap every episode of Westworld. This week we'll be recapping and discussing the theories around Season 1, Episode 6, entitled The Adversary. You can find more episodes of the show at decodingwestworld.com. You can also email us at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. And I will say, Joanna, I have been a bit overwhelmed with the emails. We've just gotten dozens, if not hundreds, of emails every week with different theories all the time, right? So much stuff. It's hard to keep track, but we do try to read every single email. So thank you for keeping those coming in. So before we get to this week's episode, I want to talk about some follow-up from last week's episode. And I want to start by talking about a couple things where I messed up, which is a common occurrence on podcasts that you and I do together. And I went on a huge, insane, unhinged rant at the end of last week's episode about how everyone knows the multiple timeline theory now, and there's no way it could possibly be surprising, blah, 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 blah. And I think, Joanna, when you and I we're on Twitter, we read Reddit, we do a podcast about Westworld, it's easy for us to forget what the experience of watching the show is like for the vast majority of people who are watching the show without reading any recaps, right? And
I think the only reason I say that I have perspective on that is because, as I said last week, I watched the first 4 episodes without you guys, and I had no idea of the 2 timeline theory, which, Reddit figured out by episode 2. So I think if I were just watching this by myself, I might have picked up on some things, but certainly not the full extent.
Okay, you're right. I'm sorry if I related, any of what I did to anything that you do. I take this. This is all on me. Okay,
no.
100% my B. Okay. Just to say, I went on this huge rant and I said, hey, if you are going to hinge your show around a big reveal and people figure out that reveal, then you're going to take away a lot of that reveal's power by the end of it, by the end of the show. And I had dinner with 2 sets of friends this week who watch Westworld, don't listen to the podcast, and had no idea what the multiple timeline theory was. And I didn't even tell them because I wanted it to be a surprise. But it just was a real wake-up call to me that or at least I am experiencing the show differently than most people are. And so when the big multiple timeline reveal comes, right, in episode 9 or 10, it's very possible that the vast majority of people watching it will be surprised. And what I mean by the multiple timeline theory is I'm, of course, referring to the idea that what we're witnessing on the show is taking place in 2 different time periods, and possibly that William or Logan becomes the Man in Black and ends up becoming him decades later. Go ahead, Jonah.
2 different time periods, if not 3. But the good news for this episode, which we'll get to, is that I think Dave and I both agree that it all takes place in 1 time period.
That's right. Season 1, Episode 6, pretty sure it takes place in 1 time period. So.
Right.
We don't even see William, Logan, or Dolores in this episode, which felt almost kind of like a relief, to be honest. Didn't have to think about it, Didn't have to think about how this all fit together. But anyway, wanted to just mention that I think a lot of people's experience watching the show is unsullied, and the time period reveal will blow their minds, and so we should ready those cameras to record reaction videos when that reveal happens. Just wanted to cop to that a lot of people still don't know what it is. And I actually made a video this week putting together some evidence of the multiple timeline theory, and you can find that in the show notes. I also posted it at /film.com. And of course, you can always read Joanna's amazing recaps at Vanity Fair as well. So wanted to follow up on that. And I also wanted to follow up on another remark I made last week about how constellations could be seen differently from Earth than they are from Mars. This has to do with where the actual park Westworld is located. Some people have speculated it's on Earth. Some people have speculated it's on Mars. In a prior episode, Elsie looks up at the sky in order to try and see Orion, the constellation. And so I said, hey, in that episode, Elsie looks up at the sky. And also, by the way, Dolores looks up and sees the moon. And so maybe the fact that Elsie sees Orion or is looking for Orion, and Dolores sees the moon, that's evidence that they're on Earth. Now, of course, most people just completely ignored the second part of what I said and went straight to the error, which is that the idea that constellations are different on different planets. Turns out we got dozens of emails and tweets about this, including from an astrophysicist named Zach, who says that Orion from Mars would look exactly the same. And because those stars are so far away that if you're in a different planet in our solar system, that they look almost identical, the constellations do. I did ask about the moon, though. I asked Zach about the moon, and he said the moon is very close to Earth and comparatively not very close to Mars. All the stars in the sky are much, much farther away from us than we are from Mars. It would look like it would be like looking at a distant city skyline from 20 miles away and then moving 10 feet to the left. It would look almost exactly the same. So that's kind of the difference between Mars and Earth from a constellation / moon perspective. Is that the moon would look a lot different. Constellations would look very similar. So.
And if you've been listening to this podcast all season, you know that I am very stubbornly in the I don't care where it takes place camp. But that being said, a friend of the show, Jesse Karp, did send me a Reddit link today that I thought was really enjoyable, which it's titled on Reddit, the title is Anyone Else Plug in the Latitude and Longitude on the Delos Topology Map. So if you go to, it's like westworld.com or whatever, right, where we're seeing all these, discoverwestworld.com, where HBO has put all these, like this extra ephemera, like Delos terms of service and all this other stuff that you can read if you want to. We shouldn't presume that most people watching Westworld have read it. But if you go there to discoverwestworld.com/images/explore_BG, sorry about all this. But anyway, there's a map with longitude and latitude in it. And drum roll, if you plug that into like Google Maps, you get the bottom of Italy between the boot, the toe, and the heel. Right by the water there, and we know there's an ocean on the map, so we know that Westworld is near the water. I'm not saying Westworld necessarily takes place in the bottom of the boot of Italy. This might just be sort of an homage to spaghetti westerns or something like that. So I just thought it was like a fun little thing that a Redditor did that may or may not prove to mean anything at all. So there you go.
Another possible location for where the park is. A couple other things I just want to point out about the multiple timeline theory. Several people have objected to the term multiple timeline theory, which seems to indicate that that term multiple timelines implies that it's like alternate universes rather than like two time periods. Do you have a preferred nomenclature for talking about the different timelines? Like timeline is just a cool word, so I like using it.
Timeline is also a Michael Crichton novel. I am trying to adopt time period because timeline is bothering so many people and I'm tired of them sending me angry tweets about it. So I am trying to adopt time period as a nomenclature.
Yeah, but it just doesn't sound as cool as multiple timelines, right? It's not as easy to say. It doesn't roll as trippingly off the tongue.
Right, and it's not a Michael Crichton homage, so, whatever.
The Outline made a video about this theory as well. They called it the non-linear timeline theory, I think, which I also kind of like, right? Is non-linear timeline okay? Anyway.
You can say whatever you want, Dave.
A lot of people have talked about how, well, of course, Jimmy Simpson's character, William, becomes the Man in Black because they both have blue eyes. And Logan does not have blue eyes. And so that's how we know that William is the Man in Black. I just find that to be a bit silly, to be honest, because you are talking about a universe in which they have invented sex bots that have AI and that can pass as human. Pretty sure people can wear contacts or change eye color or do something in this time to, like eye color. I don't think should be a huge factor. I will say that
I don't think it's conclusive, but I think if we're looking at two candidates, Ben Barnes, who's the actor who plays Logan, and Jimmy Simpson, the actor who plays William, to my mind, especially via eye color, Jimmy Simpson, William looks more like Ed Harris, the Men in Black. A lot of people don't think they look anything alike. It doesn't really matter. I mean, honestly,
I don't think either of them
really matter.
Yeah, I don't think either of them looks like the Man in Black. But I do have sympathy for one point of view, which is that there's no way Jimmy Simpson could be the young Man in Black, because for young Ford, we've seen them use digital anti-aging to make him look like young Ford. And
Anthony
why wouldn't they
Hopkins,
do the same for a young Ed Harris? You know what I mean? Why would they make it inconsistent like that?
Twist. Whoa, So I mean, I hear the people who are frustrated that they digitally de-aged Anthony Hopkins for young Ford, and might use a different actor altogether for young Man in Black. That is a sort of internal logic and inconsistency, I guess. I don't care about it.
All right, fair enough.
The other thing I do want to mention, we've gotten a lot of emails and tweets over the last couple weeks. Of course, that if we're gonna look at the meaning of names on Westworld, Dave brought up Hector Eschaton is an interesting name. I think Dolores is an interesting name in terms of Dolor means sadness or pain. Eschaton means, what is it again, Dave? Like the world?
Yeah, the end of the world. Yeah,
the end of the world. Robert Ford there's of course a famous person named Robert Ford from Western history, and he was portrayed by Casey Affleck in the assassination of Jesse James by that coward Robert Ford. Robert Ford shot Jesse James, one of his partners. So the question is Anthony Hopkins' character named Robert Ford because he actually murdered his partner, aka Arnold?
And perhaps because Ford is a coward and kind of a conniving person, not someone who's totally wholesome, perhaps, as well?
Definitely. That coward. I mean, if they had cast young Casey Affleck as young Anthony Hopkins instead of CGI'd him, I'd be fully on board with this. So.
Yes. All right, well, that is all the follow-up I think we need to do. A lot of follow-up. We just blew right past there. But there is a lot more to discuss this week. So, Season 1, Episode 6, called The Adversary. Let's talk about what goes on. I will just say right off the top, before we get into this episode is kind of what I thought Westworld would be as a show, mostly, right? I thought that it would mostly be about this bureaucratic stuff, corporate espionage, and robots malfunctioning. I thought that would be 90% of the show. And so all the William and Logan stuff was a huge surprise to me. And we've spent the last few episodes wrapped up in that. I'm really glad that we got to see kind of the other side of the park in this episode. Overall, were you a fan, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, especially, we'll talk about it more, but especially Tandy Newton's performance in this episode. I think shifting the focus to Maeve, whose plotline I find the most compelling, actually, giving Tandy Newton this showcase for her talent. And anchoring us all in one timeline, so I didn't have to worry too. I mean, there's still plenty of other mystery reveals that we can talk about, but yeah, I agree with you. It was sort of like a welcome break from the Dolores stuff, which was just getting a little too. I felt it's my fault mostly for chasing my own tail a lot. So yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about Bernard's storyline. The first time we see Bernard in this episode, it's very similar to the last scene we saw him interacting with Elsie. Elsie's bringing the satellite device to him and telling him about what's going on with the transmission. He finds out he needs to go to an older section of the company building in order to access the satellite so they can figure out the location and whether or not there are any other rogue hosts in the park who he needs to track down. So he goes down to level 82, and let me just say this, Joanna. I feel like there's OSHA violations galore in Westworld. So maybe it does take place on Mars, where there is no Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration. Because why on earth would you have vast sections of your building in complete disrepair and apparently in a dangerous condition? It feels a little bit silly to me. Like, why would...
Yeah, every time the lights flicker on and off and and there's water everywhere, it freaks me out. I feel like, Bernard's going to get electrocuted or something like that. I completely agree with you. It's nonsense.
It's nonsense. It's a completely unsafe work environment, and yeah, it feels like it's a little bit too flashy in a way that almost pulls you out of the reality of the show. But what we do see...
The cool thing that I think they want to do eventually, and I think we saw a little bit of it in this episode actually, but is show you the stuff that you're seeing in decay and disarray, eventually show it to us in its full flower when it wasn't flooded and broken down,
Right, assuming that the multiple time period theory is true. right? When he goes back downstairs, he see it's all old and decrepit, and then maybe we'll see it when it's not that way later on when they reveal the multiple time period theory. Correct?
Right.
Yeah. So we see Yul Brynner's gunslinger character, the Man in Black from the original Westworld film by Michael Crichton, in the background, blurred out. So that is a really cool reference. Also, the music during that section matches the music in Westworld, the original film as well. Nice little Easter egg. Some people are already spinning up fan theories around it, including Peter Schroeder at slashfilm.com. But I think you and I both agree this is just an Easter egg. We shouldn't assume that it's anything else, right?
Yeah, I think it's just like a throwaway visual gag and a nice like sort of instrumental cue. But I've definitely been wrong about one or two things before. So, but no, I mean, I don't think we should look for anything bigger, though. People have already pointed out that in the timeline of this, and now I'm just talking about timeline, not time period theories, but like in the span of this show, perhaps the incident that happened at Westworld in the film is the incident of 30 years ago that they keep talking about. It doesn't really make any sense to me because I feel like they're going to show us the incident and it's not going to have anything to do with Yul Brynner, but these are the theories that we're chewing on.
Also, we never actually see Yul Brynner's face. I believe he's out of focus the entire time.
Oh yeah, it's just a distinctive hat and a distinctive way he's standing with his hands like sort of looped through his belt loops, which is very similar to the way that Yul Brynner sort of stalked around in that film. Yeah.
But maybe it's not him. Maybe it's a completely different person. No one knows. But I agree. It's just total Easter egg, I think. So then Bernard logs onto an old computer, and there is. I'll let you perform this, Joanna. What's going on with the old computer as you write in the show notes here?
I'm not going to do it.
Oh, but Joanna, that's my favorite part. Okay, anyway.
He logs into the old computer, and as he's logging onto the screen, you see the old logo. Whoa!
Whoa!
Yeah.
Okay, see, I can't do it as good as you. So
so the old logo is on the welcome screen, and really, we've talked about this before. I know we said this was a break from the time period theory talk, but like, one of the anchors, and as Dave and I have both noted in our work this week, HBO tweeted out before the show started, the HBO Westworld official Twitter account tweeted out, like, on Westworld, even the logos are worth a second look, hint, hint. And so, people have been using the different logos that we see when William arrives at the park, in the flashback on a lab coat, and here on this old computer at the welcome screen, as an indication that, anytime you see that older looking W, you're looking at something that is either a relic of the past or happened in the past. And in this week's episode, we see Maeve walking around, and she walks in front of a large screen, very similar to the one that William walked in front of. It's not the same place in Delos, but it's similar. And she has the new logo. He had the old logo.
Right.
So it like tracking logos feels like a way to anchor yourself if, in fact, there are two different time periods.
I think at this point, it would be a huge disappointment if the two different time periods theory was not true, just because the logos have been consistent with it, right?
Right. So there's also this weird thing. This is a little behind the scenes stuff that Reddit picked up on. That if you look at the thumbnail for episode 2, Chestnut, on HBOGo.com, you'll see that the thumbnail for the episode is William and the intake host, played by Tulu O'Reilly, in the changing room where he's picking out his gun and his hat and his pants and all of that. Behind them is the new logo, but in the episode itself, it's the old logo, which means at one point in production, it was the new logo, and they changed it before they put it on screen to be the old logo. And if you watch the episode again, you can sort of see the digital effect of that. When they cross in front of the logo, you see a little bit of digital blurring. So
why would they have done that?
I don't know. Well, this is another thing about this episode, not to get too much in the weeds, but we are talking about the Bernard plot.
But this is a podcast about Westworld that's often longer than each episode. So, of course, we can get in the weeds. Let's get into it.
Okay. So someone tweeted me after the episode, emailed us, And it was like, damn, just how many outfits did Bernard have on in this episode? And so when I rewatched it tonight, I tracked all the episodes, which Dave can corroborate because I wrote
tracked all the outfit. You tracked all the outfits.
Oh, sorry. I tracked all the outfits in the episode, what Bernard's wearing throughout the episode. I wrote down descriptions in our show notes. And to me, what it reveals is some funky editing of continuity in the episode. He goes back and forth. He'll say things like, earlier today I was X, but it doesn't really match up with tracking his outfit. That's getting bogged down in the minutia, but what I will say is I believe production shut down right around episode 6. And there are a lot of questions about why production on Westworld shut down entirely. The official line is they wanted to get ahead on their scripts, so that's why they did it. I wonder, and this is baseless speculation, if HBO saw the first few episodes and was like, this is confusing or this isn't whatever, like gave some notes that were like, please go back and do some things. So maybe the old logo is a good way to to help drop some clues about timeline, and they changed that after the fact to give you clues, and so they just put it in where it wasn't there before. That's just complete baseless speculation on my part. But it's possible that HBO is like, this is too confusing. They're going to be mad when we get to the end. So you're going to need to change some things to make it clearer, even though it's still not clear to 90% of the people watching. From what I can figure out from watching the outfits in this episode, and I'm not recommending that anyone listening be so obsessive as to go back and track the outfits, but I kind of think that the stuff where Bernard goes to the house in Sector 17 maybe possibly once belonged to a different episode. Maybe a future episode. Maybe they moved up the reveal of what I would like to call the Arnold reveal. I could be wrong. But anyway, if you feel like being super obsessive and rewatching the episode and then tracking the outfits, let me know what you think. So
I will say this about the outfits, though, is your theory last week, which I believe received a massive boost in this episode, was that Bernard actually is Arnold, right? That Bernard has Arnold's consciousness inside him, and that also he looks like Arnold, right?
Right.
And one piece of evidence towards that theory is that in the Bernard Dolores scenes that we see where he's interacting and diagnosing her, he is dressed very differently than in the rest of the show, right? He's usually dressed kind of schlubby. His top button is unbuttoned. He has a tie that's kind of loose. But in the Dolores Bernard scenes, he's very stylish. And I believe I don't think he is wearing a tie in those scenes, or he's dressed in a much different way.
What's tricksy about it is that I don't think it's much different. I just think it's I think it's different.
It's like an overall feel.
But it's not like he's wearing like a Hawaiian shirt and Bermuda shorts.
Right.
It's still in the same palette. It's just you're right. He looks more stylish, a little nattier, and he's wearing a suit that we just don't see him wear in his other various combinations, which are all sweater vests and blazers and ties and yeah. So I agree with you. I think they're using wardrobe very subtly. If the flashbacks if the scenes we're seeing between Dolores and Bernard in that little glass cage, which I actually believe we saw in this episode, in
the background in level 82, you're saying, right?
No, I'll tell you later.
Okay.
But if we're in fact seeing Arnold before he died and was turned into Bernard, if we're seeing Arnold talk to Dolores there, then they could use subtle wardrobe changes to sort of denote that. It's very complicated, but you're right. I think there was a lot of evidence in this episode that pointed us towards that. Specifically that Arnold,
the photo.
Arnold certainly doesn't look like the guy in the photo, because the guy in the photo we saw is a clone of Ford's dad. Something one of our listeners pointed out to me, and it's like a regular listener, so I so apologize that I don't remember his name. But he pointed out to me that if you look at that photo again that we originally saw of Ford and who we thought was Arnold, and now we know is Ford and a robot clone of his dad, there's a curious space missing in the framing of the photo. So the new theory is that if we see that photo again later, as Dave mentioned, we might see that photo again. We'll see someone who looks a lot like Bernard, but is actually Arnold, standing in that empty space in the photo. That there's a third space there, and if you rewatch that scene where Ford gives Bernard the photo to look at, Ford's sort of studying him as if like, is he going to see it or is he not going to see it? If he's a robot, or I'm sorry, we're not allowed to say that. If he's a host, he shouldn't be able to see it because his programming should prevent him. Like if you rewatch that scene, it's sort of like he's testing him a little bit.
I don't know how I feel about that, Joanna. I am off the whole Bernard is not seeing something in the photo theory part of your theory because I just think Ford straight up lied about the photo. And that's not Arnold, and Arnold wasn't even there. He just straight up lied about it. But that's my interpretation.
If we see that photo again, and there's a third person in that photo,
I will give you a really nice housewarming gift. Oh wait, I already did.
Oh, you already did. That's true.
but I'll yeah.
Okay,
but
I'm
willing to eat crow. I'm willing to eat crow on the show. Metaphorically, so.
Will you admit that Ollie from Game of Thrones is a terrible character?
Never. So let's move on. So anyway, Bernard uncovers 5 hosts in some random ass area of the park, and a few things happen. Firstly, he goes to track them down. We meet the family that was created by Arnold, and it is a replication of Ford's family when Ford was younger, right?
Right. So this is where we learn this is where we get confirmation that some of the hosts we're seeing are clones. At least these 4 people and that dog. Right. Right.
And we assume that the dog is the 5th host, correct?
I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
Peter Serrata from Slash Film was saying how maybe there's another host that we haven't seen, but I think the dog is the 5th host. And so a few curious things. Firstly, as we've already pointed out, the photo of Arnold that Ford showed us earlier was actually a photo of Ford's clone father. Or perhaps Ford's real father. We don't know, right? But they're dressed exactly the same.
Age-wise, I would say probably the clone.
Well, Ford is a lot younger in that photo, too, is he not? So
yeah, but the way the clone robots are set up in this little house, Ford's a kid.
Oh, that's right. You're right. So it's almost definitely the host version of Ford's father. Ford's father attacks Bernard just out of the blue, which is kind of frightening. And then Ford himself appears out of nowhere.
Like nowhere.
If you watch that scene again, the space where Ford is standing on is completely empty. Cut to the reverse angle, and Ford is suddenly there. So what's going on there?
Which is something we've seen. I don't know that we talked about it last week, but in episode 5, we got a lot of that kind of stuff in the Dolores plotline.
Right.
You can read my breakdown of this over on VanityFair.com, but basically to me it means Dolores sort of popping in and out of time periods. So you'll get a scene where Dolores is standing all by herself, and then all of a sudden William's there. I don't think this is a time period like fuckery here. I don't. But Ford did appear out of nowhere. So
yeah. So I think that's the problem with the show. I think in some ways is because the mysteries are so deep that Ford appearing out of nowhere can seem to take on more meaning than just a stylistic flourish. You know what I mean? In my opinion, it's just a filmmaking stylistic flourish that this guy appears out of nowhere. It's kind of like when you watch Jason Bourne walk off into the distance and a bus passes by, and when it's passed, he's gone. You know what I mean? It's just kind of a little stylish, like a little, thing.
I'm gonna disagree with you again. I think this is more of like us seeing what Bernard can see and can't see.
All right.
At a given time.
We'll see.
This is the hill I will die on.
That's fine. That's cool. It's cool. So far, I think you've been more right than wrong, at least until we learn what the actual truth is. But when I say right and wrong, I mean I've believed more things than you said than not. So, because we don't actually know if the multiple time period theory is true or not. Anyway,
No idea.
Arnold explains. Yeah, right. Arnold explains, or I should say, Bernard actually mistakes Ford's father for Arnold because he saw him in the photo earlier, right? And then Ford explains, hey, this is my family. I don't tell anyone about them because it's like a connection with my past. And if you had a host version of your son, wouldn't you want to keep him alive? Blah, blah, blah. Always bringing up the son. Ford's really pulling out that card a lot. So Bernard seems satisfied with what he's found. The 5 extra hosts was a red herring, right?
I mean, he's unsettled. Like, he tells Ford, this is like the first act of insubordination, I think. He tells Ford, like, I'm pretty creeped out by what I'm seeing here, to be perfectly honest with you. These hosts aren't registered in the system. It's upsetting, which I thought was interesting. And also, like, since we're talking about Bernard being a host or not, I think my favorite line about that in this episode is earlier when he was talking to Elsie, and he says to her, like you said, I've been here forever.
Yeah.
Which is just like, if you believe that he has been there since the start of the park, that's a fun line. So
yeah. Totally. What else happens with the Bernard Elsie storyline? Elsie gets to the bottom of what's going on with the host. Like, she does some exploring, finds out that, hey, it's an inside job, and oh, by the way, the woman you've been sleeping with, but that relationship is over now. She's probably responsible. Furthermore, Arnold seems to have his fingerprints all over this code and telling the robots to do crazy things.
Well, yeah, hacking the bicameral mind system, which is only existent in the older robots. So, we know that Dolores is an old model, and I guess it's possible that we know that Maeve had previous builds, but I don't know how much of an old model she is. But it seems like possibly only the hosts that are being affected by whatever's melting down are the ones with the bicameral mind system, which is no longer something that they put in the robots. I think that's true. And then the other thing that I wanted to say about that is, what we forgot to mention in the creepy Ford family house is we saw a little bit more, there's a big, huge raging debate last week about what the robots looked like over time in the park. And here we saw these are original models. They look exactly like the modern models, except the kid's face opens up, and you see all the circuitry that the Man in Black was talking about last week when he was talking about how the robots are inside all circuitry. And so
they have like a million little pieces, right?
Yes.
Whereas now they're made up of organic
biomatter,
yeah.
and so people who are trying to sort of anchor whether or not we're seeing different times in the park are trying to figure out what the robots would look like. If indeed William and Dolores are tooling around 30 years ago, would the robots look different? Would they look like old Bill, who is this sort of creaky, herky-jerky model? And I would argue that they wouldn't. I would think that they would look like the Ford family. The Ford family are original models, and they're quite smooth and sophisticated looking, and we see that the robot dog bleeds profusely, so I don't even think like a lot of blood coming out of these robots really helps determine age. So that's just my take on robot evolution.
Yeah, makes sense completely to me, Joanna, and I'm being serious, which is, making sense to me about robot evolution is not a thing I thought I'd ever say to you in any context, but here we are. I should also say I skipped over the fact that, Bernard and Teresa broke up this week. Single tear falling down my face.
Yeah, sad.
I don't know if it's that sad. I mean, were we really super invested in their relationship at this point?
I'm only sad because Bernard seems to not want it to happen, and I root for Bernard no matter who he is or how much circuitry is inside of him. Yeah. I'm rooting. So, yeah.
She calls off the relationship because she doesn't want the board questioning her objectivity during a very intense time when Ford seems behaving unstably. So, anyway, as I was mentioning, Elsie's getting to the bottom of this corporate espionage thing. She goes to this theater, which is apparently like if the serial killer from Saw took up arts and crafts. That's what the theater would look like. And I thought this section was pretty dumb. Just very... If this happened in a horror movie, we would give the horror movie a D. You know what I mean? Because of how obvious and contrived it feels, and why Elsie, being one of the smartest people in the show, would be that dumb about her surroundings and robots malfunctioning, and therefore I'll go to an isolated place where someone's trying to do something incredibly illegal and unsafe, perhaps, and like mess with the robots.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Pretty stupid. Pretty stupid.
Yeah, pretty dumb. Yeah.
I saw you speculate on your post that it's Stubbs that grabs her at the end.
I think so.
We don't really see enough of anyone to get a sense of it, but it's obviously someone who's larger than her. That's the only thing we really know, right?
It's a white dude.
Oh, really? I didn't see a face.
And you don't see a face. You see hand and neck. And he's got a long black sleeve on. So that's pretty Stubbsy to me, but we'll see.
It screams Stubbs. The outfit screams Stubbs.
Positively Stubbs. That arm, so stubby. And I think my theory, based on nothing, is that she's not in danger, that he's there to like almost rescue her from herself, sort of thing. Do you know what I mean? I think it's a fake out grab.
Right.
I think he's going to be like, what are you doing out here all alone, yelling about how, like, corporate espionage when, like, people are out here committing corporate espionage. What's wrong with you? So we'll see. I don't know.
Here's my question. How is Arnold tinkering with the host data, changing loops, breaking loops, making robots lie to people? How is he doing that if Arnold died decades ago? Joanna, what do you think of that?
Ford's put something this episode about all true artists put something of themselves in their artwork, right? And so a lot of people are theorizing that Arnold somehow coded, left coding behind him that is causing this mischief. We saw people using, we learned earlier in the season that Arnold was the one, I think, who liked to use voice commands. So all the old phrases that they use to sort of get the host to do things, that's from Arnold. So these violent delights have violent ends seems like a vestigial sort of Arnold thing. And I still am unclear as to exactly what triggered it. Maybe the coding in the Reverie, maybe something else. But if it's sort of infecting the system with Arnold's name attached to it, because we learned in this episode, and this is skipping ahead, but we learned in this episode that Maeve's settings, her paranoia and her self-preservation had already been bumped up by someone with clearance way above the Butchers, right? And so you want to assume that that's Arnold, since Arnold is the one that Elsie points out. And so I feel like it's almost something in the system, a trigger that he left behind in the code.
Right. Alternate theory is that if your theory that Bernard is Arnold is true, that it's Bernard who's doing the messing around. Right?
Could be. Sure.
So, but I think the way you described it just now would also work really well. Let's talk about a few other things that happened with Ford this episode. He is still mapping out where his new storyline is going to take place. So they go back to the village where I think Lawrence is from, right?
Las Mudas, yeah.
Yeah, and they're like patching up the bullet holes from the fight that the Man in Black had, which I thought was very funny, and everyone freezes again, which on the show I find to be very effective. And if you listen to my interview with Vincenzo Natali, a lot of the scenes where people freeze, they're moving the camera to kind of accentuate the effect, which I thought was very effective. And Ford says, hey, we've disturbed these people enough. We can have the canyon stop short of this village, which I feel like the characterization with Ford's a little inconsistent, Joanna, because just like a couple episodes ago, he was cutting open that host's face and saying these people don't feel anything, so why would he care about disrupting these hosts' lives? Are we supposed to interpret that Ford himself is conflicted about this, do you think? Is that the intention?
I think so. It seemed to me like he has some sort of emotional attachment to that town, some sort of sentimental attachment. So maybe something happened there in the past and he doesn't want to destroy the evidence of that. And, we've seen Ford be sentimental before. You're right that, he said the hosts mean nothing and he cut one's face open and that was disturbing. But in his conversation with Dolores, it was last week, right, where he was talking to her and he said, you're the only one who remembers what it was like then. I think he just does have some sort of lonely nostalgia for a history that he can't share with anyone anymore. And Las Mudas might be one of those elements,
Totally. Later, Ford finds the young version of himself and a dead robot dog, and then he interviews young Ford in a kind of an interrogation room. Young Ford lies at first, and then during diagnostics tells him that young Ford, was the one who ended up killing the dog because the dog had killed a rabbit, I think, right?
I can't remember.
It was a cat or a rabbit in the same way that Ford had told the story in last episode about the dog catching the thing. This is a really effective and frightening scene. Love the framing with Ford on the left side, and then you see a reflection of young Ford kind of overlaid on top of him. Really great way of showing through the framing kind of what you're trying to communicate, that like young Ford is a part of older Ford. Really like that. Anything else you want to say about this? I mean, I think this is clearly setting up the conflict for the rest of the season, that these robots are finally growing out of control in a way that could harm humans, right?
Well, there's two things. One, I believe if you rewatch this scene, to me it looks like the same setting where Dolores and Arnold are having their one-on-one conversations.
I see. So that's where you think you saw the room.
I do believe so. I believe Ford and the younger version of himself are sitting on the outside of the room that we've seen Dolores and Arnold sit on the inside of. There's the same, I mean, there's different stuff, but if it takes place 30 years apart, there could be different stuff in there. There's the same table, same shelving, same concrete walls that we haven't really seen elsewhere in Delos, I think. So I think it's the same location.
So just good production management, or a way of relating it to what's going on with that Bernard Dolores stuff?
Right.
Who knows?
It's a good question. And then the other thing is this scene might be an indication of trying to figure out what it is exactly Ford wanted to do. It's hard when everyone is lying, right? Okay, so like if you think Ford was lying about the photograph, I don't think he was technically, but if you think he was, we know all the hosts are lying all over the place. So it's really hard to track who's saying what to whom and what is true. And so, when young Ford originally starts his story, he's lying, and then Ford makes him tell the truth. But do we even know if that's the truth, et cetera, et cetera? But let's just say that second version is the truth, and he's saying that this voice who he sees as Arnold is telling him to put the dog out of its misery because the dog is a killer, and if young Ford kills the dog, then the dog can't harm anyone anymore. So let's extrapolate that right to the human hosts. If Arnold at some point thought the human hosts were damaging in some way, he might have programmed them to kill themselves or kill each other so that they could all not hurt anyone anymore. I'm just trying to figure out what it is that Ford wanted to do. Dolores said last week that Arnold wanted her to destroy this place, is what she said. So I'm just trying to figure out what he wanted to do and why exactly.
Right.
So,
like, did he want to kill all humans? Did he want robots to kill all humans, as Bender did in Futurama, or did he want the robots to kill each other so that they didn't harm humans? Right.
Right. I mean, I still want to go back to my theory that I think Arnold just wanted them to have full consciousness, but because that's kind of what Ford told us. But I don't know. I'm open to all possibilities.
Right, because Ford could be lying.
Anyone could be lying at any time.
Yeah, totally. We also learned, I should point out, that there are 82 first-generation hosts still in existence, and 47 of them were designed by Arnold, and then Bernard lists them in alphabetical order, and you see Dolores is one of them. You don't really get a good look at any of the other ones. I suspect that these 47 will be important at some point, or some of them will be important. But that would be kind of the extent of the damage, assuming your theory is correct about Arnold putting in kind of crazy paranoiac code into the hosts, right? That maybe it would just be these 47 hosts, right?
Right. He said alphabetical order, so it makes sense that Dolores is sort of at the top of this rolling list that he's looking at, and if Maeve is one, she would be lower down. But I'm curious about Abernathy, because we feel like Abernathy is definitely one. I don't know if he has a different name and he would be listed differently, but when he'd be at the top of the list, if his name is just, Dolores' original father, if his name is just Abernathy,
right? Or did they alphabetize him by first name? I didn't see.
Right. I don't know. I'm going down the rabbit hole, so we should probably move on. But you're right that I'm sure this is going to come back in some way. Yeah. Those numbers, that list, in some way. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, so that's basically what goes on before this episode. Let's talk about Sizemore. This episode, Sizemore is on the roof of the Delos Resort or what have you, and he has uncomfortable conversations with Teresa, who confronts him. He's really depressed. Sizemore is not only depressed about how Ford killed his Odyssey on the Red River narrative, he's also concerned about how all the disruptions Ford's making are destroying his existing narratives in the park. He kind of mouths off to this attractive woman who he meets at the bar, and then later we find out that it's actually the board member representative in a big, shocking twist.
I think a couple things are important. One is that Teresa says that this character the character's name is Charlotte Hale. I'm going to say the actor's name. Brace yourself. The actor's name is Tessa Thompson of Creed and future Thor fame and Dear White People. Fantastic actress. I've been waiting for her to show up on the show. So she's there. She's the executive director of the board, and she's there to oversee transition in management. I think she said management or personnel. I wrote it down. But, it seems more and more that Teresa's really intent on pushing Ford out and collecting information in order to push him out, and that Teresa is there, that Charlotte Hale is there to sort of help with potentially pushing Ford out of the picture. I mean, she says to Sizemore on the roof, if Ford's new storyline fails, the board will have to get rid of him, and they'll be looking for a replacement. And she says they won't be looking here. She means in the bar. So she means like get back to work.
Right.
If you want to be the head storyteller, storyteller is probably not the title. And of course we see Sizemore urinating on the map. So
which apparently has like physical properties. It almost looks like the urine is bouncing off like an actual like contour of the map versus. I thought the map was holographic.
Like a hologram.
Yeah.
Mm.
Anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, I have a theory about Sizemore, and it's a simple one, so calm down, which is this, that I think that character was written into the pilot. It doesn't really work very well as a character. And we've seen like kind of very little of him for a few episodes. And my suspicion is that he will be written out entirely soon.
Why do you think he doesn't work? Let's talk about this.
I don't know. I don't want to lay it on the actor because I don't know his work and I don't know if he's great in other things. But he just seems cartoonish in a way that doesn't, I guess it's a similar criticism I had of Logan. Just cartoonish in a way that I don't think blends very well with what the level the other actors are working on. What do you think? Do you like him?
Well, he's certainly an incredibly annoying character. So it's hard to separate my annoyance at him with how the character himself functions in the realm of the show. But I think part of his purpose is to be a foil for Ford, right? That you have this guy who is wizened and has been around forever, and that's Ford, and you have young blood coming up and trying to be ambitious. But I think it's part of a more general problem that all the machinations at the park have taken a back seat so far to all the stuff that's going on within the actual storylines, like with William and Logan and with Man in Black and Teddy and that stuff. Like, those things are much more interesting to me. The William and Logan storyline is much more interesting to me than Bernard and Teresa's relationship. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I think it's part of a more general issue with this park running stuff, this office politics stuff, just being a little bit underdeveloped.
But when you have Sir Anthony Hopkins, like we've talked about the inconsistency in Ford's character, but when you have an actor like Sir Anthony Hopkins playing him, you need an amazing foil. You talked about that scene between the Man in Black and Ford in last week's episode being like the scene in Heat between Pacino and De Niro, right? Like, here are two heavyweights of who seem so significant squaring off. So to call Sizemore a foil for Ford, that's like an ant being a foil to a giant. Like, it's just not on the same. Like, it's just like really. I'm really not trying to knock this actor.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of are, though, Joanna.
No, I just don't think like I.
Do you agree with me that he's supposed to be a foil for Ford, though? Right?
I don't know. I think no, I don't think so. I think maybe initially, but no, I think that they don't know what to do with that character, honestly, to be honest with you. they shelved him for like 3 episodes, you know?
Yeah. I don't know. Just the idea. I like the idea of him. That is to say, a person. He's kind of he epitomizes a mercurial artist. You know, very moody, very dickish. But people put up with him because he's a genius and because he created a lot of these amazing narratives that guests enjoy. I feel like a lot of us know people like that. You know, you and I probably know people like that. You know, and so I appreciate that the show's trying to represent that kind of personality.
I will say, yeah, getting back to sort of conversations we had around the beginning of Westworld, which is about how it was a meta opportunity to tell stories about storytelling, right? Like they're basically putting on a TV show so you could take cracks at network executives and sensitive writers and all those other things, like things that they're steeped in as they make the show Westworld. They could show those personalities on the screen. So when Sizemore gives this really douchey speech about how he put some of himself, like the years and the squeezing out the narrative and his like self is in there, like I could definitely feel like the people who wrote that speech have had to endure speeches like that from their colleagues, like less desirable colleagues.
Yeah, or made that speech,
or made versions of that speech. So you know,
yeah, and so that's what I like the idea of him. You know, I like the idea that he represents this kind of creative force that's very hard to contain.
I like the idea of him. I guess I'm not sold on the execution.
Yeah, I agree. Agree completely. Yeah. I just don't think. I think it sounded to me like you almost didn't think the idea was even worth pursuing. I think the idea is worth it. I don't think they've done anything with it thus far, but maybe they will. Maybe they will because he does come back this episode. So, all right, we have so much more to get through this episode. Man in Black and Teddy, interesting stuff going on there. Teddy explains what the maze is, and why don't I read off exactly what he says.
While you look up that exact quote, I want to say that, this goes back to my everyone's lying sort of thing. Teddy says what the maze is according to whatever Ford programmed Teddy to say what the maze was, right? Like, we don't know if what he's saying is true. I want to believe just because that's the simplest, nicest answer, and then we would have some indication. But just like Teddy rambling off his backstory about Wyatt, this just feels like a big, long speech that was written for him that could be true and could not be true. But anyway, take it away. What is it?
Quote, the maze is an old native myth. The maze itself is the sum of a man's life, the choices he makes, the dreams he hangs on to, and there at the center, there's a legendary man who had been killed over and over again countless times, but always clawed his way back to life. The man returned for the last time and vanquished all his oppressors in a tireless fury. He built a house. Around that house, he built a maze so complicated, only he could navigate through it. I reckon he'd seen enough of fighting, end quote. A lot of layers there. Presumably the man in the center is Arnold. Is that what you took away from it? Or is there someone else? Or is the man in the center an idea rather than a person?
I mean, I think the maze is something of a MacGuffin. I don't know that I believe we'll actually see a physical maze. I could be wrong. But it does seem to be like Arnold. And then I think the way the episode actually chronologically rolls out, we then see the who we think is Arnold in a house in the middle of the park, and so you're like, oh my god, did Bernard already solve the maze and he found the house and here's Arnold? And then it's not.
Nice head fake, yeah.
But the other thing that Teddy says there is he talks about a man who died over and over again and crawled back to life, and that sounds like a host to me, right? Like someone who dies over and over again and keeps crawling back. So I don't know. It's ambiguous, but to me it sounds like more forward hand waving mumbo jumbo that will end up meaning nothing, but I could be wrong.
So they then go to try to find Wyatt, which is what the Man in Black is doing at this point. And they encounter this encampment and they say, hey, we'll just dress up as these guys and sneak through. And then you find out that, hey, Wyatt wasn't the only one doing a bunch of killing back at Escalante. Teddy was also involved.
Yeah.
And so they capture the Man in Black and Teddy, and then Teddy breaks free and goes on a rampage and kills everyone. And I thought, man, firstly, this continues to fulfill the almost weekly quota we have of action scenes happening in the show. Pretty spectacular set piece with him just mowing people down with a Gatling gun, chilling as well. And what I like about this episode and what it does that's very similar to other Nolan's work, specifically Memento, is this idea with both Teddy and Maeve that your memories make who you are. That by changing these people's memories and their lived experiences in their heads, that they can make someone into a cold-blooded killer. And Teddy doesn't even stutter. He doesn't blink. We saw him previously as a very noble, wholesome individual, and now he's a murderer. And all it took to change that was to change his experiences, to change his history. And so I think a big question is, are we more than the sum of our experiences? Are we more than the sum of our memories? Can we overcome that quote-unquote programming? I think this episode really asks that question nicely. Any other thoughts on the Man in Black and Teddy storyline this episode?
One of our commenters, Raymond Terry, who was the person who pointed out the photo with the missing space to me, so thank you for that and for this. He just said in our chat room, since we're recording live, the punch at the Man in Black. And I think I'm interpreting that to mean that the soldiers threw a punch and connected with the Ed Harris character, Man in Black. And so we need to call into question again just how much these visitors can get hurt. My working theory is that you could get hurt more if you were a visitor to the park 30 years ago than you can now. But it seems like whatever the Man in Black's experience is, he's got some wiggle room there for people being able to hurt him.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing is that not only can they hurt him, they can detain him. So they can dramatically and potentially negatively impact his experience of the park.
Well, we already knew that. Like when the massacre happens,
right? People go in jail. Like people get in jail.
Yeah. So I mean,
it just sounds really not fun to be at Westworld paying 50, 60 grand a day or whatever with benefits, and to be in a jail cell. You know what I mean?
We got kind of an interesting. Do you want to read that email now about the plot lines that don't make sense in this episode, or save it?
I'll wait. I'll save it to the end. Yeah.
Okay. Bookmark this moment, guys, and remember it. Okay.
Yeah. Some more information there about how the Man in Black can be messed with by other hosts. But let's get to the main event this episode, Joanna. We've been recording for like an hour, and we haven't even got to the most impactful storyline, which is Maeve. And this episode opens with her at the Mariposa again. She's mocking a guest, and while he's having sex with her, and then we learn later that the reason she's doing that is so that he will choke her to death, which I thought was really disturbing. And the reason she wants him to choke her to death is so that she can get moved back to the place in the park where she is physically restored, right?
Yeah.
So that she can interact with Felix and Sylvester again. Which, according to Reddit, are two names of cats, famous cats. And we also know that Felix is having fun with a bird as well. So, interesting naming there.
True.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. We should also point out, the songs used in this episode, Fake Plastic Trees and Motion Picture Soundtrack by Radiohead, both with very relevant lyrics to this episode. But anyway... She wakes up in the lab, and Felix explains to her what's going on with her, what her programming is, and there is this crazy, amazing scene where he hands her this tablet showing her how all her language is constructed, and it causes her to go haywire, which is a scene I think we've seen in movies before where robots will enter into loops and then be unable to escape, but the way it was done in this episode I thought was particularly effective.
So good.
It was pretty amazing. She snaps out of it. She convinces Felix to take her upstairs. As Motion Picture Soundtrack plays, she takes a tour, and we see all this crazy behind-the-scenes stuff, like them pumping blood into new hosts who are white, and then they start to develop flesh-colored. We see a saloon fight. We see hookers. We see
a buffalo.
A buffalo. We see horses. It's crazy how much work they put into this. You can imagine all the production designers putting so much work into this scene where they see these little mini plays play out for just 5 seconds. Just all this work just so we could get convinced of this world that they're building. It's amazing. She gets to the end. She sees this video. Notably, it uses the new logo.
Sure does.
Tallulah Riley's Sexbot character is there. Host Sexbot character is there. Someone, a listener, messaged me and said, "Hey, isn't that evidence that there's no two timelines?" And my response to that is, let's not forget that classic saying, if the Sexbot ain't broke, don't fix it. Right? It's very possible that since Tallulah Riley plays a robotic host, that they just kept using that model throughout all the decades. Do you agree?
Yeah, though we have seen her in a flashback in the park once. Like, she was a park host before she was an intake host. But I agree with you that 30 years...
When did we see that flashback?
When Arnold's talking about them building the park.
Oh, we see her, yeah.
We see her sort of, when you get to the part where the robots were like dancing, stuff like that, you see her sort of strolling through with the parasol. So at one point she was a host in the park. Then I believe she's an intake host around William's time. And now she's either still being an intake host or just recording commercials for Westworld. So, yeah.
Yeah, so she's clearly a host that's been around for a long time. So her appearance in the promotional video here does not invalidate the nonlinear timeline theory. Also, I should point out that when you see the new logo, it says a Delos destination at the bottom. But when William first arrived at Westworld in episode 2, you don't see a Delos destination underneath that version of the logo. We don't always see a Delos destination whenever we see the new logo, but maybe William is visiting the park before it became a Delos destination, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
entirely possible. So then back in the lab, they explain to her what dreams are because she's all freaked out from seeing herself in the video, and then Sylvester comes in and starts mocking Felix. Maeve wakes up and. Here's a question. Is Maeve like Chucky, do you think? Where once she's become self-aware, she can stay perfectly still as though she's a robot? You know what I mean? Like, what is her ability to navigate between being conscious and not conscious?
I don't know.
Kind of a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
there's no answer for that, but I just thought when Sylvester enters in, she sits completely perfectly still. And so I think to myself, I wonder if she's just she can just make herself completely still now that she's self-aware, right?
Can I tell you a really dumb anecdote?
Please.
That may or may not add to our experience.
Please.
Which is that when I was in Los Angeles, gosh, I want to say like 6 months ago, I was at the Chateau Marmont with friends, which is not something I usually do, but I was at the Chateau Marmont. Someone was like, if you go there, you're going to see one famous person. And the famous person I saw was Thandie Newton. I was like, oh my God, it's Thandie Newton. This is exciting. She's so beautiful. She was sitting with the actor who plays Sylvester, and they were doing like scene work. So I like to imagine that I was spying on them rehearsing this scene. It could be a later scene, could be any scene, who knows? But they were working on this. Like my friends and I were frantically IMDb'ing him to be like, is this some guy or what are they working on? What's going on? Anyway, so... that's the thing I saw in LA once.
Nice.
Yeah. I thought they were all great in this scene. I love the actor playing Felix. I'm sorry, I don't have his name handy. I think he's amazing. I think the guy playing Sylvester's really good. I think our chat room's going crazy with people having issues with this scene, and I'll promise that we'll get to it. But whatever logical inconsistencies there are, I think the performances here are all top notch. Really
agreed, and specifically Maeve when she's walking through the behind the scenes, and as you go higher up the escalators, it becomes more and more high level, right? And so I love seeing the different levels of design and execution within the park. It's pretty awesome, and her reaction to watching all that. I mean, can you imagine how much your mind would be blown if a similar thing was shown to you, right? That you were created for one specific purpose, to get fucked and maybe get murdered repeatedly, and your life basically has no meaning beyond that, and everything you know about your entire existence is wrong. And by the way, all of your friends, it's the same deal for them too.
I was thinking about this. Like, I don't want to get too much into religion because it's a touchy subject. But like, Dave and I have talked in the past that like Dave is a man of faith, and I am not. I'm a heathen. But I was thinking about like if I died and went to heaven, and then since I don't believe there is a God or angels or anything like that, like that's what it looked like to me. She's been walking around. If I were taken on a tour of heaven, I'd be like, what? What? You created us? What? I don't know. That might be a dumb analogy. Point being, Tandy Newton's face in this episode.
I don't think it's a dumb analogy. It is like a religious experience. It is finding out your reason for existing, and you can imagine God or an angel walking you around and just explaining to you, hey, the reason that cancer exists is because of this, and being like, whoa, that's mind-blowing. But yeah, Tandy Newton's performance is great during that scene because she can't react strongly, but she has to react somehow, and I think she found the perfect balance there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, and then she gets Sylvester and Felix to up all of her attributes. Now, we'll get into like the logical inconsistencies, but yeah. The idea is that they make her super smart at the end. Felix also learns that, hey, someone has been messing around with her perception and paranoia and all that stuff. And presumably that is either Arnold or old code that Arnold put in there becoming like active, right?
Right.
And when I say Arnold, I mean Bernard playing Arnold. Maybe Arnold never died, or
Right.
maybe it's old code that Arnold put in there before he died decades ago. We don't know if Maeve was one of the original hosts that Arnold built, though. We don't know if she's one of the 47, though. So,
Right.
Okay. Any other thoughts before we dive into this email?
No, all my thoughts are in response to this email. So
right.
Let's do it.
This email is entitled, The Show Has Lost Me. And this email comes in from Luke from Tooting, England, which I don't actually believe is a real place. But because it's called Tooting, Joanna.
It's 1,000% a real place, but
okay. Well, then it's a silly name. So Luke,
silly place. Yeah.
Let us not go to Tooting. It is a silly place.
It is a silly place.
So Luke writes in, I thought the pilot for Westworld was spectacular, but practically every decision the show has made since has made me like it less and less. In the first episode of your podcast, there were allusions made to the Aliens franchise in comparison to the show. Here's one more. The writing is Prometheus level bad. A few issues with the latest episode in particular. 1, Maeve blackmailing the aforementioned scientist is absurd. Her walking through the behind the scenes was a good moment. But when you've got a person who's threatening you, brain in your hand, the power dynamic is pretty one-sided. Not to mention that she's now going to go back to the simulated world, and these guys can immediately do whatever they want that would result in her decommission. False and forced tension. Point 2, Teddy and the Man in Black are concerned about a group of soldiers in their way. The show has done so much to establish the Man in Black as untouchable. Why doesn't he just go down, slaughter them all, and then call Teddy down when it's safe? False and forced tension. The second. Point 3, this episode solidified my main issue with a lot of the storytelling since episode 1. By far the strongest and most compelling aspect of that was the idea of Dolores and other hosts waking up, developing their own consciousness and existence. Since then, the show has gone out of its way to make this fascinating and rich internal struggle a series of rote, mysterious, and boring external struggles. Starting with the literalized voice inside Dolores' head, they have added conspiracy and removed nuance at the cost of their richest thematic and character developing idea. They were moving back in the right direction a bit with Maeve and the Maeve drawings and the heist story, but then this episode happened with every plotline reinforcing the interference of some unknown power/individual. So anyway, the email goes on, but I think that's the main argument right there. Is people doing unrealistic things, behaving according to the script, and not how they'd actually behave. I do think this point, number 3, is interesting about the host waking up and instead, they've turned this fascinating and rich internal struggle into a series of rote, mysterious, and boring external struggles. I don't know if I read it that way myself. Random thought, by the way, I did find it interesting that Ford saw a maze carved out on a table this week. Right? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In Les Moonves.
Yeah.
So, like, Ed Harris maybe didn't need to cut off a dude's scalp to find the maze. The maze is apparently written in a bunch of places, it would seem, including in public on a table.
It burned on the coffin last week, and then they were going to burn it into Teddy.
Why did he cut off that guy's head? The maze is everywhere, Anyway.
Well, that was in the pilot. Who knows what was written after the pilot, And I really do feel like the maze was a MacGuffin, but we'll find out.
So I have responses to this, but you can go ahead.
I do as well. I want to start by saying Luke is a listener that I really respect. I know him from the Game of Thrones stuff we do. This a lot of times you guys email us a lot, and then we get to know your names, and that flavors things. So I really, with all due respect to Luke, I don't agree, or I don't have the same reaction he does to a lot of the things that he wrote in his email. That being said, I think he's right to pick at some nits in terms of the Maeve storyline. I can see why Felix would go along with it, because I think he's really like Arnold before him, he's really enthralled by this. We see that he has aspirations to be a programmer, and I think he's just he's charmed by her. And he's also just I can see why Felix would go along with everything. With Sylvester, it doesn't make as much sense. The only explanation I can figure out there is that they're not very bright. I mean, because they're in, there's talk of, when Felix talked about wanting to be a programmer, Sylvester was like, nope, you're a butcher. That's all you'll ever be. As if in this new world, there's sort of tracks you're on due to, I think it has to do with genetics, because he talks about breeding things out in embryo. There's tracks you're on. So it might be that the butchers are a particularly stupid breed. But I'm willing to give Felix more of a benefit of the doubt that he is intellectually sort of sparked by the mystery that is Maeve.
There's several other explanations too, but were you going to move on to the next thing, or?
Well, I will just say really quick with the Teddy Man in Black thing, I kind of agree on one hand, but on the other hand, we saw the Man in Black, he tries to do that. He's like, run away, Teddy, I'll hold them off.
Right, exactly.
And then he got captured. So, that one doesn't hold up as well for me, but the Maeve stuff, I think there are questions. What's your take on it?
Well, I actually, so firstly, Zach Byerly in the chat room says that Felix and Sylvester are scared for their jobs. So they might want to go along because they don't want to be discovered, and they're worried that, hey, they're already pretty in deep shit now, and if they do any more crazy things, like deactivate Maeve or mess with the programming even more, that it will be even worse for them than whatever path they're on right now. But I don't find that super convincing. What I do find convincing is two things. Number one, Maeve reveals the fact that Sylvester has apparently been wiping hosts' memories so that other techs can have sex with them, right? Did you get that from the dialogue?
Yeah.
So
that he operates as sort of a pimp in the same capacity that she does.
Right.
Yes. So I get it that she's blackmailing him, but he has the ability, he's got functions in his hand that he can fight back against a blackmailer. It's not just someone sending him cutout letters on a piece of paper taped together in the mail. He's got extreme power over her.
Okay. Here's my second point. Point is that we've already seen Maeve can completely disregard directives given to her, right? And maybe Felix and Sylvester recognize this, and they're like, hey, if we try to deactivate Maeve, if they have tried to deactivate Maeve on multiple occasions, has not worked, Joanna. So maybe if they were to try and turn down her intelligence or her ability to move or whatever, that would not work, and then they would just be pissing her off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but what I think would have been great is for that to be in the show. Not that it needs to hold my hand in every single way, but if Sylvester had been if at any point Sylvester had been let's turn her bulk absorption down to 0 so she can't mess with us. And Felix would be like, what makes you think that's going to work? Nothing's worked on her. You know what I mean? That they even considered it.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they shot that scene and then they decided, hey, not necessary. Because that's certainly what I took away. Without having that scene in there, I just assumed, hey, this is a host who is completely disregarding all commands given to it, including shut down. So anything we try and do to stop her might not work and may only succeed in pissing her off. So
I mean, I think that Maeve is probably smarter than they are. She's very, very smart, and now insanely smart, smarter than any human. Right. And she's very, very charming and very convincing. But like this whole, I'm going to tell management that you're like, how's she going to get to management? Like her blackmail plan does not stand up in any way. So like, I think that there are just a few flaws here, and I'm willing to chalk it up to these two cat-named people being very stupid, one of them being much more sympathetically stupid than the other, you know?
And I think that there's basically a bunch of explanations you could use to explain their behavior, right? So it did not actually bother me at all, and I think we are pretty easily bothered people by this kind of thing, and it didn't really bother either of us, right? So,
I think Tandy Newton's performance is just so good that I am happy to gloss over.
Yeah, she really sells it. She really sells it. So we've gotten to the end of the episode. I thought overall very good. Had some problems with it, like the Elsie stuff was pretty rough. But other than that, I had a great time. Any closing thoughts or crazy theories you want to introduce us to this week, Joanna?
No, nothing mind-blowing other than the fact that I'm just going to double down on my claim that we're going to see that photo again. As listener Raymond Terry pointed out, we're going to see that photo again, and there's going to be a third person in it.
All right.
What? What about you?
Yeah. One thing we didn't mention, actually, is the steeple, right? We see a model, a scale model of Ford's new narrative this week, right? A lot of people have speculated that the steeple is actually the steeple that we see in Dolores' flashback.
Oh, I certainly think it is, yeah.
And I think it's a little confusing because Ford is ripping up old storylines left and right. He's destroying villages or about to destroy them, or destroying restaurants and all that stuff. And he said he's not very sentimental. He's fine with ripping up the past and starting anew. But if the steeple is a major part of his storyline, he's probably going to unearth it, right?
Yeah.
So it's some storyline happened with the steeple with Dolores years ago, and they covered it up, and they said, hey, let's never talk about this storyline again, and then now he's probably going to unearth it again. So it does send a kind of conflicting message to me about him wanting to forget his past or move on to new things, but then he's going back to something. So I'm very curious how that's all going to play out.
I am also curious. I also think in that scene where we see the model of the church steeple and Ford pulls out a notebook, I think it's Arnold's notebook, because Arnold's the one who came up with the maze in the first place. So I think this is Arnold's plan, possibly, that Ford is trying to lay out. I don't know. That's my guess.
Joanna Robinson, you had a great piece called Unlocking Westworld's 7 Most Baffling Mysteries that you wrote about Vanity Fair. We'll link to it in the show notes. And you lay out all the theories that are happening right now, and there's a lot of great stuff there, and that we have not even spoken about on this podcast yet. I think 2 that immediately come to mind are this idea that, number one, when the Man in Black encounters Dolores in episode 1, talks about how they've met before, and he says, you don't remember me, do you? I want you to fight, blah, 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 whatever. And he throws her into the barn, that he's not actually raping her and that he may actually, in fact, be protecting her. So if William is the Man in Black, very curious about whether that comes true. But another plot line that you had mentioned that I thought was pretty interesting is this idea that Dolores was involved with the tragic incident that happened decades ago, and that she has now been placed in this new loop where she needs to see Teddy die and potentially get raped and murdered herself as punishment for that. Which I thought, if true, is firstly, it's very plausible, but if true, is pretty fucked. Don't you think? Like if Ford put her in that loop, for instance?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think we've already seen something kind of Sisyphean about what all these hosts are doing in terms of pushing that boulder back up that hill every single day. And, Dolores, it does seemed to me like Dolores is being punished. I just thought her loop was so miserable from the start, and it only occurred to me this last week that might be on purpose, that she's being punished or something. Because a lot of people are like, well, if Dolores went rogue so many years ago, why would she still allowed to be active? I have some theories about that I lay out in the article, but my conclusion is she's active with a caveat. She's active with the caveat that she's punished. And she's, Ford talks to Teddy and he says, your purpose is to keep Dolores on the farm. So that's what sparked the idea of like Teddy acting as her unwitting jailer almost.
Right.
Keeping her down on the farm so that every single night her family will be murdered and she'll possibly be sexually assaulted. Right. And I really do feel like that first scene we see with Ed Harris's Man in Black dragging her into the barn. We later see a scene, right, where he says, we flash to what seems like the same scene, but inside the barn. And he says, let's reacquaint ourselves, Dolores, start at the beginning, which you and I have talked about in terms of like a flashback mechanism. But I also feel like it's, the cast and the creators were very affronted when the initial response to Westworld was, oh, good, another rape show. Great job, HBO. And they were like, no, that's not what it is. Please keep watching. And so, I imagine they would be especially upset if that actually isn't a rape at all. I mean, obviously they were alluding. They wanted us to think it was a sexual assault. But if that wasn't actually what they were showing us, as is the case with many things this season, and they can't say that in their own defense, I guess we'll see how it all plays out. But
do you have any further thoughts on the Teddy Wyatt situation? Teddy has obviously been misrepresenting his contribution to the Wyatt thing. Any more theories around who Wyatt is, or?
I really feel like the whole Wyatt thing is a big red herring, like a big distraction.
The Wyatt and the Maze things are just big MacGuffins, you think?
I do, because, as I said in that piece, I really think the weapon that Ford is pointing towards the Man in Black is Dolores. And so he's got this other stuff, the maze and Teddy and all of that, to distract him from the real danger that's coming at him, which is Dolores, I think. I think the final scene of this season, and I could be wrong, but I suspect the final scene of the season is Dolores confronting the Man in Black and possibly also confronting William at the same time. We'll see. I'm excited.
I mean, if they're the same person, you mean?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to flash back and forth in time sort of rapidly. Her sort of...
This is a pretty specific vision of the future, Joanna. So...
Yeah.
All right. We'll see if it plays out. You can always email us your theories and thoughts on the show at decodingwestworld@gmail.com. Find more episodes of this podcast at decodingwestworld.com. In the meantime, Joanna, where can people find more of your work on the internet this week?
You can find me on vanityfair.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at JoeWroteThis.
Find me on Twitter at Dave Chensky. That's Dave Chen, SKY. And all my other stuff at davechen.me. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next week.